All right. Well, I am joined today by Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch. You are an immigration lawyer. I appreciate you making time on what is a very busy, I'm sure, for you, couple of weeks.
I'm happy to be here. I think this is such an important conversation. It has been extremely busy. It's 8 a.m. right now. I've already done one presentation today.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Are you over in Texas? Is that correct?
I am. Yeah, I'm in Austin, but I serve people all throughout the state. So it's been, yes, very, very wild and busy. We're now, how many days in? 12, 13 days in. And so far, we're tracking to have 8 executive actions or policy changes just in immigration on a daily basis. So it's just been incredibly busy and overwhelming so far.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say 8 executive actions or changes on a daily basis?
That's correct.
So
Yes,
every day you're seeing all kinds of things shifting.
that's right. And not only informing people about what's going on, what it means for them, but also all of my clients shifting how this, might change their strategy, communicating with them, calming their fears, doing the different legal work. It ends up being just an overwhelming process. We've been here before. We've done it once before, but this is even way more fast and furious than last time.
Wait, you said last time, so let's back up. I mean, you've been doing this for, you said, about 20 years when we talked offline. Give me the background. So you've seen different administrations come and go, and you mentioned that this has happened before, but not to this extent. So give us the background there.
Okay, well, that could be a whole hour, but I'll try and distill it down.
Sure.
I think it's relevant to say, how I even got into this. And I'm a Spanish speaker. I went to law school 20 years ago. And at my law school, they do clinics where you can practice being a lawyer and you have clients. And everybody said the immigration clinic was the best clinic to do. So I signed up for it. And that was the extent of my thinking. I mean, back in that era, people weren't talking about immigration in the same way. And I believe, we're a nation of immigrants and what we wrote on the Statue of Liberty. And I think back in that era, a lot of us thought and felt that way. So I signed up for this clinic, and my first assignment as a law student attorney was to go to this detention center to do an intake with a family they were Iraqi Chaldean Christian asylum seekers. And it was a mom and a dad and their little 5-month-old baby
Hmm.
in this detention center. And they were all wearing prison uniforms. The baby had this little prison onesie that she was in. And her mom asked me during that interview if I could hold her, if I could take her with me and take care of her until they could get out of this place.
Wow.
And I remember just leaving that detention center. I didn't take the baby, but that night, just my whole mind was just blown about the way we were actually treating immigrants versus who we purported to be
What
as
year
a
is this?
nation. This was 2007.
Okay.
And that changed the whole trajectory of my life. I ended up taking that case as a student attorney and winning their asylum case and picking them up from detention and taking them shopping. And it was the absolute most fulfilling moment of my life to
Hmm.
date. But ever since then, I've been working with asylum seekers and doing humanitarian cases in the field of immigration in Texas. And, as you alluded to, I've weathered several presidential administrations. That detention was during the Bush administration. Then Obama came in and ended family detention. He brought it back at the end of his administration. But fast forward to Trump 1.0, obviously that was the most difficult era for immigrants and their advocates. I was on the front lines during the family separations in 2018. It was at that same detention center, actually. About 40 to 50 mothers who had had their children taken from them that summer were transferred to this detention center. And I helped them get reunited with their kids. And when I first met these women, it had been weeks. They had no idea where their children were. They had been ripped out of their arms, little kids. And they were expected to think about their asylum cases and prepare for their credible fear interviews. And meanwhile, they hadn't even spoken to their children. They had no idea where their little babies were. And over that summer, it became clear that the Border Patrol officers were tricking the parents into letting them out of their sight. rather than they
What?
started ripping them out of their arms with the screaming and the crying. But toward the end of the summer, they were like, we have to take you in the other room for processing or to take a photo. And then the parents would come back and their kids would be gone.
Wait. We got to pause for a second. We need to we got to pull this thread out. I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So someone comes from over the border, and they're picked up by Border Patrol or something like that for whatever reason. And you're saying that if they have kids with them, it was the policy. And you said that this happened towards the end. You said that this happened toward the end of the Obama administration as well, but it really ramped up with Trump, if I'm hearing you correctly, where these agents were literally at one point taking kids straight out of their parents' arms and separating them to God knows where. Or they got to a point where they would trick parents to get processed, and the parent would come back and their kid was gone. Is that right?
Now, yeah, the only sort of caveat I'll say is that this didn't happen on a massive scale under the Obama administration. There were separations of some families at the border during every administration when there's suspicion of child trafficking, et cetera. But what happened in 2018 was the Trump administration, it's no secret, they wanted to end asylum processing. This was really all driven by Stephen Miller primarily.
Yes.
So they tried, the Migrant Protection Protocol program. They tried Title 42. We could go through all that if people are interested. But then one of their attempts at ending asylum was what they thought of would be a deterrent effect to separate the families. So they launched the zero tolerance policy, which said, whoever the person is, if they're apprehended coming between ports of entry, we're going to prosecute for illegal entry. And when we prosecute, we're going to separate the families. That was sort of like the policy.
Oh my God.
What that did was on a massive scale, thousands of families who were coming over seeking asylum were separated because these parents were being prosecuted for illegal entry, which was a new policy. But the Border Patrol officers were given the directive to separate these families. This is what you must go do. And in the beginning, they would, sit the parents down and they'd be in the processing center and they'd like physically grab these children and rip them out of their parents' arms. Yes, screaming, crying.
Oh my God.
Horrific.
Let me tell you, if anyone did that to me, I would become a criminal, doing whatever I could to get those kids back. Like, I'm just saying, I'm a parent. I have 2 kids, 2 and 4. And if me and my partner traveled thousands of miles somewhere and went to a country that was so foreign to us, seeking some kind of refuge because of our home life or whatever it was, we were fleeing for our life, and they took my kids away, I would lose my mind. I would lose it. And we're doing that. You're saying we were doing that and are doing that in mass. And it really started under the Trump administration. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. They were intentional about it. And then the part that shifted was that it was so messy and chaotic because parents were responding in the way that you and I would and everybody would.
Right.
So then the Border Patrol officers started with here. I remember a girl who she and her mom were fleeing Central America. The girl had been like gang raped. It was just horrific what had happened to them.
Oh my goodness. So
they came, and this mom on the journey said to her daughter, I will never leave your side. I am with you. I will protect you. It makes me cry just talking about it again. And what happened, this was toward the end of the summer separation. The Border Patrol agents tell mom, go get on this bus. It's right outside the door. We're processing your daughter. We're finishing up her paperwork. Go sit on the bus and she'll join you. And then the bus starts driving away. And she is driving away from her daughter and can't do anything about it. And she ends up in this detention center where I was helping these moms. And just even imagine, this woman has no idea where her daughter is, hasn't even spoken to her. This is the other thing they did. They didn't keep records of which child belonged to which parent and where they went. It was just, they put them in these separate tracks with no connector.
This is under Trump or under President Biden?
Trump. All of this is Trump.
This is Trump right now.
1.0.
Okay. And we'll get to Biden later and we'll get to, okay, I got you. All right. Trump 1.0. Yeah. Got it.
So then there was a huge outcry about that family separation.
Yes.
A lawsuit, public outcry. And so that policy stopped, and then they just shut down asylum under Title 42. And, Biden, by and large, wasn't engaging in family separations. But what Biden did that was not great was he opened asylum processing, but only for children, only for unaccompanied children. And that resulted in, what they would say like a de facto separation of families, because desperate parents on the other side of the border who are they're suffering cartel violence. Most of them get kidnapped and held for ransom. It's really dangerous for refugees on the other side of the border. They'll start sending their kids over alone because their kids will get processed. I mean, they'll pin their documents on their little shirts and
God.
send them across the bridge.
Just trying to get their kids out of danger.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And that's what these, I had a client. I can tell this story because there was a piece in Time magazine about this. And it was another mother and daughter fleeing domestic violence. They came to the border together to seek asylum. They were rejected under Trump's policies. They got kidnapped in Mexico, or they were in it, like the cartels came to kidnap them, and the little girl escaped. She was 8 years old, and the mom got kidnapped. The little girl made it across the border, and then I got contacted because she was in a shelter, and I work with this organization that helps kids in shelters, and she was in quarantine. This little girl thought her mom was dead, and she was placed in quarantine for 2 weeks by herself. And I ended up, I was trying to get her connected to her uncle. Then, like 4 weeks later, her mom escapes the cartels. And this was because Biden was the president, there was a special parole program. I was able to get her mom paroled in and reunited with her daughter in the Dallas airport. I got to see them reunited. But although that story has kind of a good ending, that is an example of why the Biden policy of unaccompanied migrant kids coming in alone was actually harmful. Because had that mom and daughter been able to just come in and seek asylum from the get-go, none of that would have ever happened to them.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, no, this is intense stuff, and I'm glad that you're sharing it, because we need, I feel like especially now there's so much propaganda out there, there's so much noise being spewed out there. We need to really get down to what's actually happening. So let me ask you a few just kind of big picture questions just to get terms correct, because unlike you, I don't do this for a living, right? I'm not an expert on that. You want to talk about Christian nationalism? I'll give you all the names and terms, right? But when it comes to immigration and how the system works, I feel like I hear bits and pieces. So I'm going to ask questions that I hear other people talking about and to get your responses. The first thing I hear is that I either hear two things, right? I hear from the far right that, President Biden and Democrats, of course, they want open borders, right? We people like me, more progressive, we just want open borders. And Joe Biden flooded our country with all of these, and they use the word illegal. That's one side. The other side I hear is that, hey, our immigration system is really broken. Like, it's really broken. And for whatever reason, it seems like no one, a Democrat or Republican, really wants to seriously fix it to make it a more streamlined and consistent process. Let's take this one at a time. What's your response to the first part? Are there people out there who you've met in your work who just want open borders? What does that even mean? And then we'll get to the second part of that.
Okay. I have met a couple of radicals in my time who will actually say they believe in open borders, like a handful. Okay. But for the vast majority, myself included, of course, we believe in borders and safety and security and law. And if we're talking about, immigration is a pie, when we're talking about what's happening at the border and asylum seekers, this is like a teeny little small piece of the pie. So we just have to keep that in mind. But let's talk about asylum. Asylum came about after World War II, where a bunch of nations around this globe, ourselves included, failed to protect Jewish refugees who were fleeing the Holocaust. We actually turned a ship of 900 Jewish refugees away, the USS St. Louis, and sent them back to their deaths, okay? And so there was a reckoning after World War II where there were international treaties, and we as a nation said, we're not going to do that again. We are going to protect people who are fleeing persecution.
Right.
So we signed on to these international treaties. We codified it into our law. We said as a nation, we are going to protect people who qualify for asylum. And so we've had that really ever since, really for the last 30 years, we've had a system at the border where people would go into a credible fear interview and they'd get processed in for asylum. And it was a functioning, not perfect, but a functioning, relatively orderly mechanism for screening and processing asylum seekers. Actually, what broke all of that down was the Trump administration's various policies that dismantled the functioning system that we had in place, like the family separations, like the migrant protection protocols or the Remain in Mexico, like Title 42, which shut down the border. All of that stuff just dismantled everything that we had in place. and created chaos and confusion, increased cartel presence and violence at the border because there's all these vulnerable migrants now on the other side of the border. They are routinely kidnapped and held for ransom. I've talked to maybe hundreds of people who have been kidnapped and held for ransom on the other side of the border. Is very regular. And so this asylum process, what Biden inherited was an incredible mess. And I'm not going to say he did a great job, but what he did do was start to create more orderly mechanisms for people to apply, like the CBP One app, which was a way that people could register, turn in their information, get their background check, await an appointment. And that's what people were using. And guess what? Trump 2.0 canceled day one in office, the day of the inauguration. Yeah. 30,000 people who were in that system had their appointments canceled. People who have been waiting for months and months and months doing it, the right way. So advocates like me and the Biden administration and all of that don't believe in open borders. We believe in an orderly, reliable, dependable, safe processing mechanism to follow our own laws and promises that we've made to the international community.
So when because you're right, I hear this all the time, right? Just do it the right way, do it legally. But what you're saying is, in the case of asylum seekers, they are going through the right processes to do things the right way. And Trump on day one still canceled all of those appointments via the app that were made, right? Or we saw recently he ordered all federal funding that was going to NGOs, non-governmental organizations, really a lot of them conservative Christian nonprofits that were doing refugee resettlement and asylum work. He ordered that no government funds can be used. At one point, I have friends who are inside World Relief, a big organization doing this. They couldn't even feed them with government money. And so these are people who came through the process the right way, right? They're going through the asylum process or the refugee process. And Trump and his administration said, too bad, so sad, we don't care. We're taking that money away so you can't help these people. So it does seem like there's one level of like the propaganda of we want to stop illegal immigration. But in reality, it looks like they want to stop all immigration, especially from places where people don't look or talk or think like them. Because my understanding, and my friend Qasim Rashid's a human rights lawyer, I had him on the show last week, and he made the claim that there's about 500,000, quote, undocumented, either Canadian or European people in this country, but no one is thinking about, when I hear the word immigrant, I don't think about someone who looks like you or me or has blonde hair or blue eyes. We're thinking about a very particular type of person. You're someone who does this work for a living. You've done it for 2 decades now. Do you kind of think that do you think that the rhetoric is just a way to keep America looking a certain way? Or do you think that these people have real concerns?
I absolutely think it comes down to race and xenophobia. And it's because there's lots of reasons why I believe this. A lot of my social media video comments have been, make America white again, and actually admitting to the racial issues. But one of the things that can be so informative is to look back in our own country's history. It's a short history, right? But there have been lots of moments of anti-immigration rhetoric and xenophobia. I mean, starting with, Benjamin Franklin has this famous quote where he was talking about why should the Germans be able to swarm into our colonies and to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and they're never going to have our complexion or adopt our culture. So starting with the Germans and the Irish Catholics and then Italians and then Chinese and then Jewish. It's like, and if you look at the political cartoons of each of those eras where people are depicted as apes or rodents and they're swarming and there's this one cartoon in the mid 1800s, and it's a depiction of how you handle the Italian population, and it's got this like drawing of them just being drunk and lazy and fighting, and then they're rounded up in paddy wagons and placed in this cage, and then this cage is being dropped into the ocean. This is how we should dispose of them. Wow. Same rhetoric. Yep. Repeat. That's where we are again. And this is one of the things that, I have so many pet peeves in all of this, but this like people who come in and say like, oh, legal immigration, I believe in legal immigration. I mean, when people are ignorant and they say that, and then I try to inform and educate, but I debated Stephen Miller on Fox News several years ago.
You did?
He said the same. I totally did. It was really scary.
I got to find that clip. Oh, Stephen Miller. Jeez. Yeah, that guy's something.
Yeah, man. Well, he's the, evil mastermind behind all of this. It
100%.
really is. And he's been building this playbook for years now. But the same thing, they say the same thing. It's like, oh, well, legal immigration. I mean, to your other point about the second big question, it's like, okay, if we believe in legal immigration, then why are we so anti doing something about legal immigration?
Right.
Because that really is ultimately our big problem. Like I said, this asylum thing, if you believe in that this is who we are and it moves you, and I imagine for a lot of your followers it does, that's one conversation. But actually also the bigger conversation is that this is a nation that needs immigrant labor now more than it ever has before. And until we get honest with ourselves about that and start passing legislation that responds to the needs of this economy, we're going to continue to suffer the way that we have and have these same immigration problems in debate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you break down for us the difference between like these terms, asylum seeker, refugee versus someone who is just here in an undocumented way versus the term illegal? How do these terms break down for different types of people, etc.?
Okay, so I'll start with asylum versus refugee.
Right.
Both the asylee and a refugee are proving the same thing. They both have to prove that they have a fear of persecution based upon a protected ground: race, religion, political opinion, nationality, membership in a particular social group. That's basically what they have to prove. But a refugee gets their status outside of the United States. They've fled their country and they're in some UN refugee camp, and they go through the process, and by the time they get to the US, they've already been approved by the UN and they come in as a refugee.
Okay.
An asylee or an asylum seeker is someone who comes to the U.S. asking for that protection. They present at the border, or they're already in the U.S. and they ask for the protection, but they're proving the same thing as a refugee. That's the distinction between asylum and refugee. Now, the term undocumented, without status, out of status versus illegal technically is sort of referencing all of the same stuff, although it can get complicated if you're talking about law. Someone accruing unlawful presence, is someone in lawful status to that sort of becomes a legal conversation. But really from a layman's perspective, when we're talking about undocumented versus illegal, et cetera, what we're saying is someone who currently does not have permission to be in the United States. Either they've entered and they were not apprehended, or they entered with the visa and that visa expired, et cetera. So that group of however many millions of people is undocumented. And activists, and immigrants prefer the term undocumented because the argument is no person is illegal. Like someone who speeds driving down the road is not all of a sudden an illegal person, right? This is a civil violation and it doesn't describe the human being. So therefore, undocumented is the preferred term for the people who are of the community.
Has it really made you angry watching how a few cases of terrible things like Lake and Riley, of course, and I'm sure you're familiar with that story, and many and several others have gotten picked up by right-wing media as anecdotal pieces of evidence for therefore proving why we have to mass deport every immigrant possible? Again, that doesn't look or talk or think like them. It drives me crazy. Obviously, that story is horrible and tragic. I mean, even the parents said, please don't politicize it. And people, in particular, I'm thinking of Ali Stuckey, really made that like the calling card for why we should be mass deporting, immigrants, going to churches and schools and wherever else we can because of what this one person did. When you hear this, I mean, what's your response to that kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, it's a gut punch every time I see that stuff blasted, because I know that immigrants commit crime at a way, 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 like massively lower rate than native-born citizens. And of course, any crime against, women or girls and violent crimes, all that stuff is horrific. But when it's amplified as if it's the immigrant, issue that is the problem, I know exactly where it's going. Right. And it's also a problem for those of us that actually believe in public safety. Like, I'm interested in, a reduction in violence against women and girls, but Congress passing some law, the Lake and Riley Act, which says that now any immigrant who's convicted of, or accused even, of any type of theft offense, including shoplifting, is mandatorily detained. What that does is it fills the detention centers with people with shoplifting charges. And then what about the people who actually have violent criminal histories? They end up getting released because it's been mandated by Congress that we fill the detention centers with people with theft offenses. So it's like it has the opposite intended effect. So yeah, I believe in public safety. I want that. And so I wish that Congress and Republicans would focus on actually what matters. But the thing is, it doesn't get people riled up and voting, and it's not quite so powerful a message. I mean, this is really the bottom line, is that when we terrify people about a surge and invasion and crime and drug trafficking and child trafficking and just throw out all those words and equate all those things with immigration, guess who ends up winning at the end of all that? It's the conservative politicians who get elected and now have more power.
Well, that brings us to, kind of Trump 2.0, because you mentioned how Trump 1.0 was really bad. What are you seeing already? I mean, as of this recording, right, we're pretty much 2 weeks in. I mean, he inaugurated about 2 weeks ago. What are you seeing when it comes to immigration? I mean, I'm seeing stories, and we're going to cover one or two of them here. I think one of them is your client, of people being pulled over, for maybe a license plate issue or a traffic infraction or something, or someone at a church who he helped plant being called out by ICE agents and literally just rounded up and off to a detention center just for absolutely no reason. People who are going through the process. What are you seeing with Trump 2.0? Does it feel more organized, more intentional, just more intense? Give me your thoughts.
It feels like the first 4 years of administration 1.0 all came back and happened in the first week. So just like the massive blast of all of the policies that they worked through and really tried a lot of things. They were throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall and seeing what the courts let them go forward with in the first administration. Then they had that whole 4 years to plan. And then boom, we hit administration 2.0 and it all comes back at once. And the directive to all of the ICE agents is go and round and pick everybody up. So we are seeing a lot of activity where they're going. I mean, the thing I think that people out there in the world believe is, they're just going after the criminals. So the person who's been here forever and is a good person and pays their taxes and doesn't have a criminal history, doesn't have anything to worry about. That is not the way this is playing out. The way this is playing out is that anybody who is an immigrant, even some documented immigrants, are at risk because ICE is going to the places where immigrants congregate, the churches, the supermarkets. They might even just supposedly be looking for one person. But guess what? They throw a net around who all else is around here, and they ask everybody questions, and they're trying to detain people. They call this collateral arrests. And they're doing as many collateral arrests as they can right now. And we're seeing a lot of that. And to add on to that, it's not just ICE, it's the police agencies are also cooperating more with ICE. And then you see officers who might be inclined that way to call ICE. And so that you just see enforcement ratchet up sort of everywhere you look. And it's not just people who have criminal histories, I know that for sure, who are getting impacted.
Yeah, and a lot of these people have been here for several years or more. Where are they going to go? They don't have a home back wherever you think they might have come from, right? So you're going to round people up. I think Trump announced that they're going to open Guantanamo Bay to start, just literally rounding up people and putting them in camps and holding them, I guess, indefinitely until they can figure out what they're going to do, ripping them from their kids, right, from their homes, from their communities, and maybe putting them somewhere where they have no home or community. It's unbelievable to me to see this. I mean, it's got to be for you. It's just got to be a combination of maddening and sickening.
That's exactly what it is. It's maddening and sickening. And, those of us who know immigrants and know how admirable someone is who goes through hardship like they go through, and they go through the journey to get here just to have a better life for themselves and their children, or to keep themselves safe. And someone who goes through all that is actually like the best of humanity.
Right.
And to see that community impacted is heartbreaking. But also to understand the absurdity of it all, from an insider perspective, where I know, for example, that anytime anybody's been in the country for longer than 2 years, they have a right to due process. They get to seek release on bond. They get to go before an immigration judge and have a lawyer and defend themselves. So someone who gets picked up, they go through this horrific experience, and maybe they get sent to Gitmo. I mean, if that happens, that's just going to be a whole nother level. But ultimately, these people are going to get out and get placed in removal proceedings. And guess what that does? It massively clogs this already backlogged immigration court system. So similar to the Lake and Riley Act, what that does is it throws good people without criminal histories into the deportation machine, which doesn't allow the agency to focus on the people who might actually be a danger. So
Right.
it's like we have to have prosecutorial discretion and enforcement priorities in order to focus on what really matters. But Trump did this before. He's doing it again. They just throw all that out the window. Everybody's an enforcement priority. And guess what? That reduces safety for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then that that makes things unsafe, and then more stories are going to come out about how dangerous all the immigrants are, and then it's a feedback cycle, right? Of the chaos that this administration has caused, both in version 1.0 and 2.0, is actually responsible for a lot of the problems that we're seeing. And then that only reinforces the rhetoric of we have to get stricter and stricter, right? While harming so many people in the process. I want to pick up one or two stories, and I'll let you go to kind of get your thoughts on them. This is one that I picked up from Christianity Today. It's called When ICE Comes to Church. And here's the story for friends who can't see this on who are listening on podcasts. It says, fleeing gangs in 2022, a family here, I can't pronounce her name correctly, forgive me, Kenya Calandris, I'll just go with that for now. They tried to listen to God along the more than 2,000 miles her family traveled from the coast of Honduras to the edge of the United States. This is a Christian. She tried to listen as she and her husband, Wilson Velasquez, crossed the border illegally with her 3 children, turning themselves into U.S. authorities and requesting asylum. She tried to listen as she watched uninformed men cinch GPS tracking ankle bracelets to the heads of families, to young men, to mothers traveling alone with their children, and to her husband. She says, I always looked for God. I couldn't separate myself from him. And then it says, going further in the article, immigration officers advised Kenya and Wilson to get a lawyer, and they assigned the family a court date years away to present their asylum case to an immigration judge. With that settled, Kenya knew what God wanted them to do, find a church, and they did. And so I just want to pause right here. So even this story, it looks like, and tell me which part of the process they did not do correctly. They crossed the border, okay, illegally. They turn themselves in right away and say, hey, we're seeking asylum. We want to go through the whole process. They put GPS tracking ankle bracelets on them, which is already just a very, I think, dehumanizing thing. But I also understand. You want to keep track of what people are doing. I understand that, right? And then they give them a family court date years from now. Not like in a month or 2 months, but in years, right? And say, okay, wait for your court date. Years from now. And so they find a community. They the father here helped plant a church. He was able to work at a tire shop near their home. He worked hard. He was with his kids, yada yada yada. And then it turns out, after Trump gets into power, ICE agents find him outside the church and cart him off. They take him away, even though he's checked in with every ICE appointment. He's ever missed one. So when you see these kinds of stories, is this a good example of situations that you're finding more and more immigrants, being taken away in things like this? Peaceful, nonviolent people with families trying to go through the asylum process, waiting for their court date, and in the meantime, working hard, providing for their families, part of a church community, etc., now being whisked away because of what the Trump, really Stephen Miller, wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, in this story, I was able to read it before we talked, and it does say, further down in the story, excuse me, that he had an interaction with immigration 20 years ago, which I think is the relevant factor in this case. For the most part, people who entered and they're in the asylum process, they're not getting targeted. Now, they might be picked up in these collateral arrests, but people who have had, they're on what's called an order of supervision, or ICE is watching them for whatever reason. These are the ones who, even though they are law-abiding, they've checked into every appointment, they've been here for years, maybe they have sick kids, there's a lot of compelling factors, which is why they haven't already been removed previously. All of those folks are getting pulled in and called in for deportation, which is heartbreaking and awful. And the fact that they went after him in this way is so unnecessary. I mean, the trauma to these families and these children. I wonder what would have happened, for example, if they had sent him a letter and said, hey, we need you to present at our offices and bring any evidence about why you should be able to continue to stay here, bring a lawyer. He would have been able to plan and handle all of this. But this business of just like going in and picking people up in their homes, in their job, in their churches, it's just so draconian and unnecessary. So yeah, a lot of that is happening. The only caveat is that I do want people to know that for the most part, those people who are in asylum, who maybe just entered one time and they're awaiting their court hearing, I don't want that whole community of people to all of a sudden panic that at any moment they might get picked up. I'm not seeing that by and large, but I am seeing actions that are very harmful for people who are already under supervision orders.
So that makes sense. Thank you. And this is actually your story. You're actually representing this person. This is from the Texas Tribune. An immigrant faces deportation after a routine traffic stop in Texas, sparking more fear. Can you talk to us about this story and what's actually going on here?
Yeah, this is such a ridiculous situation. So this is a client of mine. He is from Central America. He is married to a U.S. citizen, and they have 3 small U.S. citizen kids, 4 years old, 1 year old, and then a little baby. And they were driving in West Texas. He was driving because his wife doesn't know how to drive. And he got pulled over by a police officer because his plates didn't indicate which state they were from. They were from out of state, and they were missing like the state ID. So he got pulled over for like a plate issue. Well, when he gets pulled over, he turns over his foreign passport and his insurance to the police officer, who takes it back to his vehicle. And then a few minutes later, 9 ICE agents come to the area where they are. Now, this is a guy who's hired a lawyer. He's going through the process to get his green card. It's a terribly backlogged process. Biden tried to fix that, but it got blocked by the courts. So he's in this process. Okay. So he's doing everything the right way. Well, ICE comes and takes him. And I think because the wife was there and she said, I don't know how to drive and I don't have any food for my baby, they ended up bringing him back. I'm not sure that they would have otherwise, but they did leave her there by the side of the road for 3 hours with a screaming infant who was hungry.
Jeez.
It was horrific.
3 hours of a screaming infant? That's an eternity. I would know. I would know. I mean, geez Louise.
And, she's young, and the residents of the neighborhood where they were pulled over were harassing her because they saw ICE and the police. And they left her there alone by the side of the road. And it was just, so awful for her. And then this is, again, they bring him back. He's now been placed in deportation proceedings. So now we get to go before the judge and do the same thing we were already doing anyway. So this is a person who's now one more number in this backlogged court system where he was already in process. So it's completely unnecessary to top it all off.
Right. It doesn't solve the actual problem that they're trying to claim to be solving, right? It only adds more pressure onto an already broken system. And it's like these are not actually fixing the things that they say they want to fix, it sounds like, based on what you're saying, right? The courts are backed up. Everything is backed up. Everything's not efficient. There was an app that got canned the first day that Trump took office. Like there really, it seems like, I don't know. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. I always tell my guests, tell me whenever I'm wrong. You can correct me on this. But it seems like Trump, Stephen Miller, this administration actually wants to shut down all potential options for immigrants to get here through any kind of legal process by overwhelming the system and clogging it for years and years, and making that like a real deterrent for anyone who might try to get here based on refugee or asylum seeker status, or even citizenship applications. I think about, I watch, okay, this is a bad confession, but I do watch 90 Day Fiance. Okay, I do. I like the show. But they talk about you as like a K-1 visa, like if someone comes over, they only have so long. I would imagine this is going to affect all that stuff, because if you have someone who's from somewhere south of the border that you're engaged to and want them to come over, like how does that process work? Well, if everything's backed up, it affects people who are doing everything the right freaking way. And it seems like, though, that's more by design at this point, not really as an accidental, oops, we didn't think about it that far.
I think you're totally right. I agree with you. And during the first administration, we saw processing times on all of our immigration matters double. So work permit applications, green card applications, fiance applications, citizenship applications started taking twice as much time because they pull the resources. And ultimately, I think this does go to the big question we should all be asking, which is, do they really believe in legal immigration? Because
Right.
the reality of the situation is this is a nation that needs immigrant labor. We have an aging population. We are going to need people to care for our baby boomers as they go into nursing homes and as they exit the workforce. We need workers on all levels of the skill spectrum. You know, you often hear people say like, oh, immigrants are the only ones who are going to like, you know, pick the strawberries and clean the toilets. Well, that might be true, like on the low skill end of the spectrum. But actually, we also need mid-level managers and engineers and innovators all the way up to like really high skilled PhD, you know, Nobel Prize winners. We need all of that really badly. And we have this ability as a nation to flip a switch and to get bright minds and hard workers from all over the globe the moment we want it. A lot of countries don't have that. China doesn't have that ability, for example. We could actually, if we only change the rhetoric, solve this problem and say, we're a nation of immigrants. We need more immigrant labor. Let's expand work options. Let's expand employment visas and then increase immigration. And then all of a sudden, things would be calmed down at the border. The economy would thrive. Everybody would be doing great, but it would require our conservative politicians to change their rhetoric completely and say, you know what? We love immigration. Immigrants are good for this country and we need more of them. And until they start having that conversation, we're going to continue seeing what we've been seeing, which is starting with a lie. And the lie is that immigrants are bad for this country.
I want to put this together for the audience. I appreciate you, Kate, for making time. You know, I know it's early for you and you're very busy, so it means a lot that you would come on the show and share with us your expertise. You know, I'm kind of putting two and two together here because I do go to Christian nationalist events often. I've been at Turning Point USA's America Fest 3 years in a row, and not this year as much, although it was there, but really last year in 2023, December of 2023. The rhetoric I heard from the stage, including from Charlie Kirk and from many others, was that the Great Replacement theory was real. This is a talking point from the KKK that advocates that, or that says that there is a deep conspiracy to replace the voting population in America with less white people. And they want to flood our country with different colored people, you know, usually brown-skinned people and whatever, immigrants. And they do that by overwhelming our borders to change what America looks like in order to keep Democrats in power. And what I'm hearing actually is, I'm actually hearing that rhetoric taken seriously by people like Stephen Miller and then now put into policies, right? Because what this is doing is it's clearly, there's a motive behind it. There's always a logic to this stuff, even if you can't see it and on the surface. And what they're doing is they're doing everything they can to minimize the amount of non-white European-centric people that make it here. Even when, I'm not sure if you followed this, Kate, there was a huge infighting over the H-1B1 visa process, right? And like Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, because they're billionaires, like, no, we need these people. They're great. But the real hardliners, the Trump 2.0s or your 1.0s, your Laura Loomers, your Steve Bannons, people who are blatantly racist, were like, no, this is terrible. And they actually used talking points that on the surface I agreed with when they were like, listen, we don't want technocrats making policy. I'm like, I agree, Steve. You know, like that part I agree with. But obviously your motivation is purely based on racist ideals. So I hope the audience can realize that what we're actually seeing, because the rhetoric is so sticky, it's so tricky. But the brass tacks, if we boil it down, what we're seeing is a push by this administration less than 2 weeks into taking power to minimize the amount of non-white Eurocentric people coming into the country by overwhelming the system, by shutting down the system, by deporting peaceful immigrants who are here going through the legal proceedings to either seek asylum or get a visa status or get a green card or whatever else it could be. And they're literally, and this is important. Truth telling is so key, I think, in the next 4 years. They are quite literally, the state is rounding up these people and shipping them off to deportation centers somewhere. Whether it's when I think Texas offered to build a facility bigger than Disneyland, or now maybe Guantanamo Bay. That's what we're watching happening in real time. And we are 2 weeks in to this administration. And I think it's really important that we realize that, and that we're able to call it what it is, because media is so tricky no, it's not what you think. That's extremism. The so-called moderates. I mean, we're going to die at the hands of these moderates who refuse to call it what it is. So I want you to have the last word here, Kate. My question to you, and you can, of course, respond to what I just said, but my wrap-up question is, what can people do? I get this question so often, right? They feel helpless and powerless seeing this stuff online and knowing they can't do anything about it. What can the average, just trying to get by, trying to survive where we are in America, the average family, what can they do to help our immigrant neighbor to know that they are welcome and loved and that we are in their corner and want to see a better world for them, not deport them based on their skin color?
I have no words to add to what you just said because you said it so perfectly. So I really want that sort of wrap up to just rest on your words. It was just so well put. And then to the question of what we can do, I mean, of course, call your congressmen, call your senators. We've heard that stuff ad nauseum. Pick an organization that is doing work that you believe in. The ACLU is doing strong work in impact litigation. I'm part of an organization called Vecina, which is Vecina, and we do legal services. We train volunteer lawyers to do legal services. So if you've got money to give or volunteer time to give, do that. Pick an org. But I think one of the things that I'd love to see more of, and this is actually where I think the Biden administration really fell down on the job, is bringing up the conversation on the other side, the pro-immigration conversation, the support of immigrants, the love of immigrants, the seeing how admirable they are, how hardworking they are, sharing the stories, having the conversation on social media, in your dinner parties, going to the rallies, just being one of the voices about why I think immigrants are great in this country, because it is really quiet over here on this side of the argument, and the side of the argument that talks about, Lincoln Riley and crime and criminals and immigration and bad and all that is they've got this giant countrywide megaphone.
Yes, they do.
And those of us over here on the other side are kind of sometimes a little scared to say anything out loud because you get a lot of pushback, a ton of it. Believe me, I know it. But be willing to do it. And especially if you're white. I'm white. And so I'm going to go out there and I'm going to say all this stuff and they can just come at me.
Yep.
And I am okay with that. And I want and invite more people to do what I'm doing, which is be out there and be loud and be proud about your love for immigrants, because we've got to elevate the conversation on this side as well.
I totally agree. I tell white people, especially white men, because look at me, I'm a white man. You need to own it and step up. Take some of the arrows. Damn it. Be that tough alpha male you always wanted to be. So,
here.
Kate, I really appreciate your work. Listen, we're rooting for you and with you. However we can help, let me know. Keep in touch. You have my contact information. Where can folks find you if they want to support and just see more of your content? What is your public profile?
I'm all over the socials. My last name is Lincoln, like the president, Goldfinch, like the bird. You can find me there. For Spanish speakers, that's kind of hard, so they can look up Abogada Kate and find me also.
Awesome. Kate, thank you so much for your time. We'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate the conversation.